My name is Taylor Irwin, and I'm 28 years old. 6 years ago, my mother stood in front of 500 charity donors, pointed directly at me, and laughed as she said, "Birth control is only 99% effective. She's the 1%. The entire ballroom erupted in laughter while I sat there, 16 and humiliated, as my parents called me their family mistake. That night, I left home with $40 and a backpack. They never looked for me. But yesterday morning, after 6 years of silence, my parents showed up at my door sobbing, begging me to sign some papers. They need my signature desperately. They just don't know I've been waiting for this moment. Before I tell you why they're really crying, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story truly resonates with you. Where are you watching from? Share your location and time below. Now, let me take you back to that night that changed everything. The Irwin family was Connecticut royalty, or at least, that's how they presented themselves. Our Greenwich mansion sprawled across 5 acres, complete with tennis courts and a pool house larger than most people's homes. My father, Robert Irwin, ran what everyone assumed was his investment firm from a glass office downtown. My mother, Margaret, served as president of the Hartford Women's Charity Foundation, a position that required more Hermes bags than actual charity work, apparently. Then there was Brandon, my younger brother by 2 years, the golden child with his Wharton MBA and his third failed startup that somehow never diminished his shine in our parents' eyes. While I was getting straight A's at Greenwich Academy, Brandon was crashing his second Mercedes before graduation. Guess which one of us got a celebration dinner? The money that funded this lifestyle? Everyone assumed it was father's business acumen. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. The Irwin Family Trust. My grandmother Eleanor's fortune, built from nothing through her textile company, bankrolled every country club membership, every charity gala ticket, every ostentatious display of wealth my parents couldn't actually afford on their own. I chose to become a teacher, not a lawyer, not a hedge fund manager, a kindergarten teacher. You should have seen my mother's face when I told her. She actually recoiled, as if I'd announced I was joining a cult. "Teachers are people who couldn't do anything else," she'd said, adjusting her Patek Philippe as if to reassure herself of her superiority. But here's what they never knew. Yale had accepted me. Full academic scholarship. I turned it down for the state school's education program instead. Because unlike them, I knew exactly who I wanted to be. Grandmother Eleanor was the only real person in that family of performers. While my parents played dress-up with her money, she'd built an empire from a single sewing machine in her Brooklyn apartment. She'd started making uniforms during the Korean War, eventually growing her business into a multi-million-dollar operation. Self-made, brilliant, and absolutely intolerant of pretense. She saw through everyone, especially my parents. I remember sitting in her study when I was 12, watching her review financial statements, while my parents hosted another vapid garden party outside. "See this, Taylor?" She'd pointed to a line item. "Your parents spent $30,000 on flowers last year. Flowers that died in a week. That's not wealth, sweetheart, that's waste." Eleanor taught me about compound interest when I was 10, about market volatility at 13, but more importantly, she taught me about character. "Money reveals who people really are," she'd say, watching my mother parade around in designer clothes bought with Eleanor's earnings. "Remember that when I'm gone." She died when I was 14. Heart attack at her desk, working until the very end. My parents took control of everything within hours. The estate, the trust, the investment accounts. They actually smiled at the lawyer's office. I watched my mother calculate her new monthly allowance on her phone during the funeral service. What hurt most wasn't losing my grandmother. It was watching how quickly they erased her. Her simple apartment was sold, her personal effects donated or thrown away. They kept the valuable items, of course, the jewelry, the art, anything worth selling. But her handwritten recipes, her photo albums, the quilt she'd made herself? Garbage. They thought they'd gotten everything. They thought wrong. Living in the Irwin household meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. Brandon sat at the top, the promised heir despite his mediocrity. My parents occupied their throne of pretense. And me? I was the inconvenient reminder that birth control wasn't foolproof. My 16th birthday came and went with a card slipped under my door. Brandon's 16th? A Mercedes G-Wagon with a red bow in the driveway and a party that made the society pages. When I earned a full scholarship to the state university, my mother's response was, "Well, thank God someone's charity case won't be us." When Brandon got into Wharton, barely after a sizable donation, they threw a party that cost more than my entire scholarship was worth. Here's the part that still amazes me. I'd actually been accepted to Yale. Full ride, academic merit. The acceptance letter came on a Saturday when my parents were at the club. I held that cream-colored envelope, knowing it would change nothing. They'd already decided who I was, the mistake, the burden, the child who inexplicably chose teaching over tax brackets. So I declined Yale quietly, accepted the state school gladly, and started tutoring kids for $15 an hour to buy my own textbooks. While Brandon burned through his third Mercedes before college graduation, I was teaching 5-year-olds to read in inner-city Boston, learning what actual fulfillment felt like. My mother visited my classroom once, unannounced. She stood in the doorway watching me with 20 kindergartners, her Chanel suit attracting sticky fingers and curious eyes. "This is what you chose?" she asked later, emphasis on the disgust. "Yes," I told her. "This is what I chose." She never visited again. The Hartford Women's Charity Foundation annual gala was my mother's Super Bowl. 500 of Connecticut's wealthiest gathered at the Four Seasons Ballroom, writing checks they'd claim on taxes while pretending to care about underprivileged youth. The irony wasn't lost on me. I actually taught underprivileged youth, but that didn't merit a mention in the program. That night in May, 6 years ago, my mother had outdone herself. Ice sculptures, a string quartet, centerpieces that cost more than most people's rent. She wore a custom Oscar de la Renta gown and diamonds that caught the light like captured stars. My father stood beside her in his Tom Ford tuxedo, playing the role of supportive husband while checking his phone every 30 seconds. Brandon held court at the bar, regaling investors with tales of his latest startup, something about disrupting the disruption industry, I think. He'd already burned through $2 million of trust money, but his Rolex gleamed with promise of future failures. Then came the speeches. My mother took the podium, champagne flute in hand, smile practiced to perfection. She began with the usual platitudes about giving back, about responsibility, about family values. The crowd hung on every word, these people who knew nothing about actual struggle. "Family," she said, pausing for effect, "is everything. Robert and I have been blessed with," she looked directly at Brandon, "a son who makes us proud every single day." Someone in the audience asked, "What about your daughter? Isn't she here tonight?" My mother's smile didn't falter. If anything, it grew wider. She found me in the crowd, pointed her manicured finger directly at my face, and prepared to destroy me. "Oh, Taylor?" My mother's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. "Well, since you asked." She paused, savoring the moment like aged wine. "You know how birth control is only 99% effective?" The ballroom grew quiet, 500 faces turning toward her. "Taylor is the 1%. The laughter started slowly, uncertain at first, then building to a roar that filled the crystal chandeliered space. My mother stood at that podium, pointing at me, her 16-year-old daughter, while strangers laughed at my existence. My father chuckled into his whiskey. Brandon actually applauded. "We call her our little accident," she continued, drunk on attention and cruelty. "Proof that even the best plans can go sideways. But don't worry, we've learned our lesson. One mistake was enough." 500 people laughed at a child that night. I know because I counted every face, memorized every smile, cataloged every person who found humor in my humiliation. Mrs. Vanderbilt from the yacht club wiped tears from her eyes. Mr. Harrison from father's firm slapped his knee. These people who'd known me since birth, who'd watched me grow up, who'd congratulated me on my grades and achievements, they all laughed. I stood up slowly, my legs surprisingly steady. The laughter followed me as I walked through that ballroom, past the ice sculptures melting under hot lights, past the champagne pyramid, past the photo booth where families captured their perfect moments. Not one person stopped laughing. Not one person said this was wrong, except one. As I pushed through the heavy doors into the parking lot, heels clicking on asphalt, I heard footsteps behind me. An older woman, Patricia Morrison, wife of someone important, I couldn't remember who. She pressed a business card into my shaking hand. "Call my husband when you turn 18, she said quietly. "James Morrison, estate attorney. Your grandmother Eleanor made certain arrangements. They don't know." She squeezed my hand. She knew exactly who they were, dear. And she prepared for it. Then she was gone, back to the party, back to the laughter, leaving me with a business card that would change everything. I held that business card like a lifeline as I packed my life into a backpack that night. $40 for my tutoring money, 3 changes of clothes, my laptop, and that small white card with raised lettering. James Morrison, Estate Law. The house was silent when I left. They were still at the gala, still celebrating their social triumph. I walked past Brandon's trophy case, past the family portraits where I always stood slightly apart, past the kitchen where our housekeeper Maria had been the only one to ever ask if I was okay. I left no note. What was there to say? They'd already announced to everyone who mattered that I was their mistake. Fine. Let them live with their perfect son and their perfect image and their perfect lies. The bus station at midnight isn't where you expect to plan your future, but that's where I sat, reading and rereading that business card. Your grandmother Eleanor made certain arrangements. What arrangements? What did she know? What had she done? I couldn't call Morrison for 2 more years, not until I turned 18 and became a legal adult. But Patricia Morrison had risked her social standing to find me in that parking lot, to deliver that message. That meant something. That meant everything. Boston was 6 hours away by Greyhound, far enough to disappear, close enough to return when the time was right. I had $40, a partial scholarship, and a business card that promised answers in 2 years. As the bus pulled away from Hartford, I didn't look back. I was done being their mistake. Whatever grandmother Eleanor had planned, I'd be ready for it. I had time to prepare, to become someone they never expected, someone worthy of Eleanor's faith. 6 years can change everything or nothing at all. I'd built a life in Boston brick by brick. My apartment in Brookline was small but mine. Every rent payment made from my teaching salary, every piece of furniture bought with money I'd earned. No trust fund, no family help, just me and my determination to prove I was nobody's mistake. The kindergartners at Boston Community Elementary didn't care that I'd walked away from Greenwich privilege. They cared that Miss Irwin read stories with different voices, that I remembered their birthdays, that I never gave up on them even when they couldn't sound out simple words. Their parents, immigrants, single mothers, working 3 jobs, they understood struggle. They understood survival. Last month, I'd won Teacher of the Year for our district. The award sat on my bookshelf next to a photo of grandmother Eleanor, the only family picture I'd kept. The ceremony was small, just parents and faculty in the school gymnasium, but it meant more than any charity gala ever could. I'd met with James Morrison 4 years ago on my 24th birthday. What he'd told me had changed everything, but I'd waited and built my life, waited and documented everything, waited for the exact right moment. The trust conditions were specific: 5 years of complete independence, no family support, proof of self-sufficiency. I had 1 more year to go. Then yesterday morning, my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw them. My mother, her makeup already perfect despite the early hour. My father checking his phone even while standing at my door. And Brandon, fidgeting with his Rolex, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. They'd found me. After 6 years of no contact, no birthday cards, no attempts to reach out, they were here. And they were crying. If you've ever been dismissed by family for choosing a different path, you're not alone. Sometimes the most successful people aren't those with the fanciest degrees, but those who live according to their values. Leave a comment sharing your story, and if this resonates with you, please consider subscribing to support the channel. Taylor, please, we need to talk. My mother stood in my doorway, and for the first time in my life, I saw her without an audience. Her tears had already smudged her carefully applied mascara. Margaret Irwin crying without someone to witness it? This was unprecedented. I let them in because I was curious, not kind. They sat on my IKEA sofa like it might contaminate them, taking in my teacher's salary apartment with barely concealed judgment. Even in crisis, my mother couldn't help noting the quaint decor, the way you'd compliment a child's crayon drawing. "We need your signature," my father said, cutting straight to business. He pulled out a thick manila folder, 50 pages of legal documents. "It's regarding your grandmother's estate, a formality we overlooked." Overlooked. Right. "You have no claim to the trust," Brandon added quickly as if I'd asked. "This just makes it official. Clean, family unity and all that." His Rolex caught the morning light as he gestured, the same nervous tell he'd had since childhood. I took the documents, pretending to skim them while actually reading every word. They needed my signature to refinance the trust, to pull another massive distribution. The date was specific, 3 days before my 28th birthday, 3 days before something important happened. "Why now?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "It's been 6 years." My mother's composure cracked slightly. "The trustees are asking questions. Something about original documentation, verification of heirs, bureaucratic nonsense, but they won't proceed without all signatures." The trustees? Interesting. They didn't know James Morrison was the trustee now, that he'd been slowly tightening the screws, requiring more documentation, more proof of rightful access. "I'll need time to review this," I said, "with my lawyer." "You have a lawyer?" Brandon laughed. "On a teacher's salary?" I smiled for the first time. You'd be surprised what teachers can afford when they're not spending trust money on failed startups. The room went silent. They needed me, and they had no idea how much I knew. "There's nothing to review," my mother said, her patience wearing thin. "You sign, we leave, everyone moves on with their lives. The trust continues supporting the family, as it always has." Supporting the family. That's what they called their systematic drainage of Eleanor's legacy. "The family that called me a mistake?" I asked quietly. My father shifted uncomfortably. "That was unfortunate. Your mother had too much champagne that night." 500 people heard her," I replied. "She pointed at me and called me the 1% birth control failure. You laughed." Brandon applauded. "Ancient history," Brandon said, waving his hand dismissively. "We were different people then." Were they? My mother still wore Eleanor's diamonds. My father still checked his phone every 30 seconds. Brandon still fidgeted with his Rolex, now worth more than my annual salary. "If I don't sign?" I asked. The temperature in this room dropped. My mother leaned forward, her tears mysteriously dried. "Then things become complicated. Your teaching position, for instance. The Boston Community Elementary Board includes several family friends. Your apartment. Did you know your landlord belongs to our country club? Amazing how small the world can be." There it was. The real Margaret Irwin, threatening her daughter's livelihood over money that was never actually hers. "You'd destroy my career because I won't sign away rights to money you say I don't have anyway?" "We're protecting family interests," my father said, as if that justified everything. I stood up, walked to my door, and opened it. "I need 48 hours to review these documents. You can return then." They left reluctantly, confident they'd won. The moment the door closed, I walked to my closet, pushed aside winter coats, and opened the small safe I'd installed 4 years ago. Inside were the real documents, the ones they didn't know existed. They returned exactly 48 hours later, this time with reinforcements. A man in an expensive suit stood beside them, their lawyer apparently. Thomas Brennan, according to his business card, specializing in family wealth preservation. Miss Irwin, Brennan began smoothly, I'm here to ensure you understand the documents fully. Your signature simply confirms you have no claim to the Eleanor Irwin Trust, which has been managed by your parents as trustees for the past 14 years. Managed, I repeated. That's an interesting word choice. My mother's eye twitched. We've been responsible stewards of Mother's legacy. Stewards. I pulled out my phone, pretending to check something. Is that what you call spending $12 million in 6 years? Because that's what the public records show. Property transfers, loans against the trust, distributions. The room went silent. They hadn't expected me to know that. How did you? Brandon started, then stopped. Public records, I said simply. Amazing what you can find out when you know where to look. For instance, did you know that trust distributions over a certain amount require all beneficiary signatures? Even beneficiaries you claim don't exist? Brennan frowned, flipping through his papers. You're not listed as a beneficiary. In your version, I said. My father stood up abruptly. Enough games. Sign the papers, Taylor. Don't make this harder than necessary. Or what? You'll call my landlord, the school board? I smiled. Go ahead. I have tenure, stellar reviews, and a union lawyer who would love a wrongful termination case. My landlord? I've been his best tenant for 5 years, never missed a payment. My mother's mask finally slipped completely. You ungrateful little. We raised you, fed you, clothed you, gave you everything. You gave me $40 and a bus ticket, I corrected, after telling 500 people I was a mistake. But you're right about one thing, you did give me everything. Everything I needed to become who I am without you. Brandon grabbed the papers. We'll file without your signature. Try it, I said. See what happens on my birthday in 3 days. They left angry, confused, and worried. Perfect. After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment and allowed myself one moment of pain. Not for losing them. I'd grieved that family years ago. But for the family we could have been, should have been, if money hadn't poisoned everything. I called in sick the next day, telling my principal I had a family emergency. Not a lie, really. Then I took the train to downtown Boston, to a gleaming office building where James Morrison waited. They came to you, he said. It wasn't a question. 3 days before my birthday, just like you predicted. Morrison smiled, pulling out a thick folder. Your grandmother was a brilliant woman. She knew exactly what your parents would do after she died. That's why she created the conditions. I'd first sat in this office 4 years ago, the day I turned 24. Morrison had shown me everything then, the real trust documents, the video Eleanor had recorded, the conditions that would change everything. 5 years of complete independence, Morrison recited. No family financial support, proof of self-sufficiency. And if, during those 5 years, your parents publicly humiliate or disown you, he pulled out a document. The moral clause activates. The moral clause. Eleanor's genius revenge from beyond the grave. The charity gala video, I said. You have it? Multiple angles, 12 witness affidavits, newspaper society page coverage. Your mother calling you the 1% birth control failure is thoroughly documented. And on my 28th birthday? You become the sole beneficiary. Your parents lose all trustee rights. The $50 million, what's left of it, transfers entirely to you. $50 million. They'd spent $12 million already, but $38 million remained. Enough to fund hundreds of scholarships, build schools, change lives. They don't know, I said. They're about to, Morrison replied. The Hartford Children's Charity Gala is next week. Your mother is receiving Philanthropist of the Year. Of course she was. Morrison pressed play on his laptop, and suddenly I was 24 again, sitting in this same chair, watching my grandmother's face fill the screen. Taylor, my dear one. Eleanor's voice was exactly as I remembered, warm but steel strong. If you're watching this, then you're old enough to understand why I did what I did. In the video, she sat in her simple study, no diamonds or designer clothes, just a cardigan I'd given her for Christmas when I was 10. Your parents love money more than meaning, she continued. I've watched them for years, spending what they didn't earn, valuing what doesn't matter. But you were always different. The teacher in the family. She smiled. They'll mock you for it, but teaching is the noblest profession there is. The video Eleanor went on to explain the trust's real structure, the moral clause she'd embedded, the 5-year test, the birthday trigger. I'm betting on you, Taylor. I'm betting you'll build a real life without their money, that you'll prove worth isn't measured in dollars, and when you do, when you've shown you can stand alone, then you'll have the power to do real good with what I've built. She held up documents. These are notarized, witnessed, filed with the state. Your parents can't change them, can't challenge them. If they humiliate you publicly, if they disown you, they lose everything. It all goes to you. The video ended with Eleanor looking directly at the camera. Don't let them break you, sweetheart. And when the time comes, remember, this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. Use the money to build something meaningful. Be the person they never had the courage to be. Morrison stopped the video. She recorded this a month before she died. She knew she was sick. She prepared everything. The moral clause is airtight, Morrison explained, spreading documents across his desk. Your grandmother hired 3 different law firms to review it. Publicly humiliating or disowning a beneficiary triggers immediate transfer of all trustee rights. And they did it in front of 500 witnesses, I said. 512, actually. I have the guest list. Morrison pulled out another folder. Plus, it made the society pages. Margaret Irwin's delightful quip about family planning was the headline, if you can believe it. Delightful. They'd called my humiliation delightful. Your parents have been living off distributions they weren't entitled to take, Morrison continued. Every penny spent after that gala was technically theft. They just didn't know it yet. Why wait until now to enforce it? Your grandmother's conditions. You had to prove yourself first. 5 years of independence, no family support. You've exceeded every requirement. Teaching salary, independent living, even winning professional recognition. You're exactly who Eleanor hoped you'd become. I thought about my students, their faces when they finally understood a new concept. About their parents, working multiple jobs, sacrificing everything for their children's futures. Those were the people who deserved Eleanor's money. Not my parents with their country club memberships and charity galas that were more about champagne than change. What happens at the gala? I asked. Morrison smiled. You attend as a guest. I've already purchased your ticket. When your mother accepts her award for philanthropic excellence, you'll have the opportunity to address the room. I'll be there with all necessary documentation. The transfer will be public, legal, and immediate. They'll fight it. Let them try. We have video evidence, witness testimonies, newspaper coverage, and your grandmother's ironclad documentation. They can't win. I stood to leave, then turned back. Why did Patricia Morrison tell me about you that night? What's your connection? Patricia was your grandmother's best friend, Morrison said quietly. Eleanor saved her family's business once, decades ago. Patricia promised to watch out for you. She kept that promise. Even in death, Eleanor had protected me through people who understood loyalty. The next 3 days were choreographed down to the minute. Morrison filed the necessary paperwork with probate court, ensuring everything would be legal and binding the moment we acted. I contacted 12 witnesses from that night 6 years ago. Surprisingly, many remembered the incident clearly and were willing to provide statements. I was appalled, Mrs. Jennifer Hartley told me over the phone. Calling your own child a mistake at a charity gala? I never attended another one of your mother's events after that. Dr. Michael Chen, who'd run the pediatric ward where I'd volunteered in high school, was even more direct. I wrote your mother off my donation list that night. Any woman who could humiliate her child publicly had no business running a children's charity. Piece by piece, the case built itself. Morrison had court orders ready, transfer documents prepared, even a press release drafted. We weren't just going to transfer the trust. We were going to do it in a way that prevented any future challenge. I bought my gala ticket with my own money, $500 that represented a significant chunk of my savings. But I wanted no claims that I'd used trust funds for anything. The dress I chose was simple, elegant, black, purchased from a consignment shop but impeccably maintained. I didn't need designer labels to show my worth. Morrison would arrive separately with his paralegal and the documents. Patricia Morrison would be there too, along with several other witnesses from that night. The Hartford Courant Society reporter, who'd covered the original incident, had been quietly informed something newsworthy might occur. The stage was set. The same ballroom, the same crowd, the same woman accepting an award for philanthropy she'd funded with stolen money. This time, though, the ending would be different. This time, the truth would have its moment. The story is reaching its climax. If you've ever had to stand up to toxic family members and set firm boundaries, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments. Sometimes sharing helps us heal. And if you want to see how Taylor handles the gala confrontation, keep watching. The morning of the gala, my 28th birthday, I taught my kindergarten class as usual. We were learning about butterflies, about transformation, about how something small and overlooked could become something beautiful and powerful. Miss Irwin, little Sophia asked, "Were you ever a caterpillar?" "We all start as caterpillars," I told her. "Some of us just take longer to find our wings." That afternoon, Morrison called with final confirmations. The probate judge had signed off on everything. The moment I presented the evidence, the transfer would be immediate and irrevocable. My parents would have no legal recourse. "There's something else," Morrison said. "Your parents tried to take an emergency distribution yesterday, $3 million. The bank called me as trustee of record. They didn't know your parents no longer had that authority." "What did you tell them?" "That all distributions were frozen pending verification of beneficiary status. Your mother called me 17 times. I didn't answer." I imagined her panic, her fury at being ignored. Margaret Irwin didn't get ignored. "She'll be desperate tonight," I said. "Good. Desperate people make mistakes." I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing my statement for the gala. Not a speech. I wouldn't grandstand like my mother. Just simple facts, presented calmly, with documentation to support every word. The truth didn't need embellishment. As I dressed that evening, I thought about the 16-year-old girl who'd fled in humiliation 6 years ago. She'd had nothing but $40 and a business card. Now I had a career, a purpose, a life built entirely on my own terms. And in a few hours, I'd have justice. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know you're planning something. Don't embarrass yourself. B. Brandon." Still trying to intimidate me. I deleted the message and called an Uber. Time to end this properly. The Four Seasons ballroom hadn't changed. Same crystal chandeliers, same gold-leafed ceiling, same stage where my mother had destroyed me 6 years ago. Tonight's theme was investing in tomorrow's leaders, which felt ironically appropriate. I entered quietly, my simple black dress a stark contrast to the designer gowns swirling around me. A few people did double takes. Was that the Irwin girl? The one who disappeared? The teacher? My family held court at the head table, my mother resplendent in a burgundy Carolina Herrera gown that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Father wore his usual Tom Ford, Brandon a new Brioni suit. They were laughing with the mayor, the chief of police, various hospital board members, their entire power structure on display. They didn't notice me. They never did unless I was useful or problematic. Morrison stood near the bar, briefcase at his feet. looking like any other corporate attorney enjoying free champagne. Patricia Morrison sat 3 tables over, elegant in navy, giving me the slightest nod of acknowledgement. 12 other witnesses from that night were scattered throughout the room, all here by design. The program showed my mother's award presentation would happen after dinner, before dessert. Maximum attention, minimum chance of people leaving early. Margaret Irwin never did anything without calculating the optimal audience exposure. I found my assigned seat, table 47, back corner, with the other individual donors who'd bought single tickets. Perfect. Anonymous until the moment I chose not to be. Dinner was served, filet mignon that probably cost more per plate than I spent on groceries in a month. I watched my mother work the room, air kissing and false laughing, playing the role of generous philanthropist while wearing my grandmother's diamonds. Then the lights dimmed. The president of the Hartford Women's Foundation took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, our philanthropist of the year has raised over $3 million for children's charities this year alone. $3 million of stolen money, I thought. My mother rose, waving regally. Showtime. My mother's acceptance speech was a masterpiece of fiction. She spoke about growing up watching her mother Eleanor build a business, about learning the value of giving back, about the importance of family legacy. The audience hung on every word, unaware they were listening to a woman who'd spent her actual mother's money while throwing away her photos. Family, she said, just like 6 years ago, is everything. My husband Robert and our son Brandon understand that responsibility to give back, to lift others up, to... I stood. Not dramatically, not aggressively. I simply stood up at table 47 and said, clearly but calmly, "Excuse me, Mrs. Irwin." 600 heads turned. My mother froze mid-sentence, her face cycling through confusion, recognition, and then careful calculation. I believe there's something relevant to add about the Irwin family legacy. The foundation president looked confused, but intrigued. And you are? Taylor Irwin, her daughter. I walked toward the stage, every step measured. The one she called the 1% birth control failure in this very room 6 years ago. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some remembered. Others were hearing it for the first time. My mother's smile became rigid. "Taylor," she said through gritted teeth, "this isn't the time." Actually, it's exactly the time. I reached the stage. The president, sensing drama that would make tomorrow's headlines, gestured for me to continue. Since we're discussing the Eleanor Irwin Trust and how it funds these charitable endeavors, the donors deserve to know the truth about who actually controls that trust. My father was half standing, Brandon pulling at his arm. Morrison had moved closer to the stage, briefcase in hand. As of today, my 28th birthday, I do. The silence was absolute. You see, I continued, my grandmother Eleanor included very specific conditions in her trust. Conditions my parents never bothered to read carefully. Mr. Morrison, would you please? Morrison stepped forward, documents already in hand, ready to destroy an empire built on lies. Morrison's voice carried the authority of absolute legal certainty. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm James Morrison, executor of the Eleanor Irwin Trust. What I'm about to share is a matter of public record, filed with the Hartford Probate Court as of 9 a.m. this morning. My mother tried to interrupt. This is highly inappropriate. What's inappropriate, Morrison continued calmly, is misrepresenting fiduciary responsibility. He pulled out his first document. The Eleanor Irwin Trust contains a moral clause, established by Eleanor Irwin before her death 14 years ago. This clause specifically states that if the trustees, in this case Robert and Margaret Irwin, publicly humiliate or disown any beneficiary, they immediately forfeit all rights to the trust. The room erupted in whispers. My mother's face had gone pale beneath her foundation. Morrison pulled out an iPad. 6 years ago, at this very gala, this occurred. The video played on the ballroom's screens. Someone had recorded my mother's speech on their phone. There she was, in all her cruel glory, pointing at me while declaring me a birth control failure. The laughter of 500 people filled the room again, but this time, the current audience wasn't laughing. They were horrified. 12 witnesses have provided sworn affidavits, Morrison continued. The Hartford Courant published a piece about it. The evidence is overwhelming and incontrovertible. That was taken out of context, my father shouted from his table. The context, I said quietly, taking the microphone, was a 16-year-old being publicly humiliated by her parents at a charity gala for children. The same parents who've spent $12 million of trust money in 6 years, while I put myself through college on a partial scholarship and tutoring wages. Morrison held up the final document. As of today, Taylor Irwin's 28th birthday, having met all conditions of 5 years' complete independence, she is now the sole beneficiary and trustee of the Eleanor Irwin Trust. The transfer is complete, legal, and irreversible. My mother grabbed the microphone. You ungrateful? The audio cut off. The foundation president had signaled the tech booth. Security, he said quietly. Please escort the former trustees out. What happened next was both chaos and choreography. Security moved toward my parents' table while Morrison continued reading from his documents, his voice cutting through the ballroom's shocked murmur. The trust's current value stands at $38 million, he announced. $12 million has been spent over the past 6 years, including $3 million in just the last 18 months. Every penny spent after the moral clause violation 6 years ago was technically unauthorized. This is theft, Brandon shouted, jumping up from his seat. That money is ours. Actually, Morrison replied, it never was. Your parents were trustees, not beneficiaries. They had fiduciary responsibility to preserve the trust for its intended heir, Miss Taylor Irwin. My mother lunged toward me, but security intercepted her. Her perfect composure finally shattered completely. I raised you. I gave you everything. You gave me $40, I said into the microphone, my voice steady. You called me a mistake in front of 500 people. You never looked for me, never called, never cared until you needed my signature. The foundation president had recovered from his shock enough to take control. Mrs. Irwin, your award is hereby rescinded. The Hartford Women's Foundation cannot in good conscience honor someone who has misrepresented the source of their donations. That broke her. My mother, who'd lived for public recognition, who'd built her entire identity on being seen as charitable and generous, crumpled as the weight of public judgment finally turned against her. Furthermore, Morrison added, the $3 million pledge made to the foundation this year will need to be returned, as it was made with funds Mrs. Irwin had no authority to distribute. The ripple effect was immediate. Board members were making phone calls. The mayor was quietly leaving. The chief of police was conferring with Morrison about potential charges. My parents' entire social infrastructure was collapsing in real time. You've destroyed us, my father said, his voice hollow. Your own family. No, I replied. You destroyed yourselves 6 years ago. I just showed everyone who you really are. As security escorted them out, my mother sobbing, my father stone-faced, Brandon still sputtering about lawsuits, I turned to the audience. These people had laughed at me once. Now they were silent, processing the complete reversal they'd just witnessed. The Eleanor Irwin Trust will continue supporting children's education, I said simply. But with transparency, accountability, and genuine purpose. My grandmother built her fortune to create opportunities for those who had none. That's what it will do again. The applause started slowly, then built to something genuine. The immediate aftermath was swift and merciless. Within an hour, my mother's photo was being removed from the foundation's wall of donors. The country club president, who'd been at the gala, was already on the phone discussing membership termination for conduct unbecoming. Brandon's investors, sensing blood in the water, were pulling out of his latest venture before the dessert course was served. Morrison and I set up an impromptu office in a side conference room, processing the legal transition. Every document had been prepared in advance, every contingency anticipated. Eleanor's planning had been meticulous. The trust's accounts are frozen effective immediately, Morrison explained, as Foundation board members filed in to witness the transfer. Your parents have no access to any funds. The mortgage on the Greenwich mansion, the car leases, the credit lines, all of it was secured against the trust. Without access, they have approximately 30 days before foreclosure proceedings begin. They have nothing of their own? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Your father's business has been operating at a loss for 3 years, funded entirely by trust distributions. Your mother's charity salary was paid by the trust. Brandon's ventures? Morrison shrugged. Let's just say he inherited your father's business acumen, not your grandmother's. Patricia Morrison appeared in the doorway, smiling softly. Your grandmother would be so proud, she said. You handled that with exactly the grace she predicted. She predicted this? Oh, yes. Eleanor knew your parents would self-destruct eventually. She just wanted to make sure you were safely away when it happened. The Hartford Courant Society reporter appeared next, recorder in hand. Miss Irwin, care to comment on tonight's events? I looked at the recorder, then at the growing crowd of Hartford's elite watching from the doorway. These people who'd laughed at a teenager's humiliation, who'd enabled my parents' fraud through their silence. My grandmother believed in building futures, not destroying them, I said carefully. The trust will be restructured to provide educational opportunities for underserved children. Full transparency, public accountability, and most importantly, no more galas where wealthy people congratulate themselves for giving away money that was never theirs. Several board members winced. Good. I didn't gloat. That would have been easy, satisfying even, but it would have made me like them. Instead, I stood at that podium where my mother had just been removed and spoke directly to the room. The Eleanor Irwin Educational Foundation will launch next month, I announced, my voice carrying across the silent ballroom. Unlike previous initiatives, we'll focus on children aging out of foster care, first-generation college students, and those who've been told they're mistakes or burdens. Because no child is a mistake. Every child deserves someone who believes in their potential. A woman near the front started clapping. Then another. Soon, the entire room was applauding, not the polite, obligatory applause my mother had received, but something genuine. We'll need board members, I continued. People who understand struggle, who've built something from nothing, who measure success by lives changed rather than dollars raised. If you're here because you actually care about children's futures, not just the social cachet of charity work, please see Mr. Morrison. I stepped away from the microphone, task complete. No victory lap, no prolonged humiliation of my family. The documents had spoken louder than any speech could. The foundation president approached me. Miss Irwin, that was remarkable. Your restraint, given the circumstances. My grandmother taught me that revenge is a poison you drink yourself, I replied. This wasn't revenge. It was justice. There's a difference. As the gala dissolved into chaos and conversation, I found a quiet corner to check my phone. 17 missed calls from Brandon, 43 from unknown numbers, probably reporters or lawyers. One text from my principal. Saw the news. Take tomorrow off. You've earned it. But there was one message that stopped me cold. From my mother's personal number. Your grandmother would be ashamed. I almost laughed. Eleanor would be ashamed? Eleanor, who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd seen through my parents' facade from the beginning, who'd constructed this exact scenario to protect me and her legacy. I texted back. She planned this, every detail, check your email. Then I forwarded her the video Morrison had shown me, Eleanor explaining everything, predicting everything, preparing everything. Let her live with that truth. By morning, the story had exploded beyond Hartford. Teacher inherits millions after parents' public humiliation backfires, ran on CNN. The original video of my mother calling me a birth control failure went viral, paired with footage of last night's reversal. The internet, it seemed, loved a good comeuppance story. My phone hadn't stopped ringing. Good Morning America wanted an interview. The Times wanted a feature. Publishers wanted a book deal. Everyone wanted to monetize my pain, turn it into content. transform justice into entertainment. I turned them all down. Instead, I went to school. My kindergartners didn't care that I was suddenly worth $38 million. They cared that Miss Irwin was there for morning circle time, that I still did the voices during story time, that I still helped them sound out difficult words. Miss Irwin, are you rich now? Sophia asked with 5-year-old directness. I've always been rich, I told her. I have all of you, don't I? Meanwhile, my parents' world continued its complete collapse. The Greenwich Mansion was listed for emergency sale. The country club had officially revoked their membership. My father's company, unable to secure emergency funding, filed for bankruptcy. Brandon's investors hadn't just pulled out, they were suing for misrepresentation of assets. But the worst blow, the one that truly broke my mother, came from her own social circle. The women she'd brunched with, gossiped with, competed with for decades. They disappeared overnight. Margaret Irwin, without money, was just another middle-aged woman with a cruel streak and a reputation for humiliating her own child. Morrison called that afternoon. Your parents' lawyer reached out. They're requesting a meeting. No. They're also suggesting they might contest the trust transfer. Let them. We have everything documented. That's what I told them. They seem desperate. Desperate. 6 years ago, I'd been desperate. I'd survived. Now it was their turn to learn how. 3 days later, they showed up at my apartment again. No tears this time. They'd moved past manipulation to raw desperation. My mother had aged years in 72 hours. My father's phone, his lifeline, was nowhere to be seen. Brandon looked deflated, his Rolex conspicuously absent. We have nothing, my mother said flatly. The house is gone. The car's repossessed. Your father's business is bankrupt. We can't even afford a lawyer to fight this. I let them stand in my doorway. They'd never be invited in again. You took everything, Brandon accused. I took what was mine, I corrected. What Grandma Eleanor left me. You spent what wasn't yours for 6 years. We're your family, my father said, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. Family? I pulled out my phone, played the audio from that night. My mother's voice filled the hallway. Birth control is only 99% effective. She's the 1%. They flinched. Family doesn't do that, I said simply. Family doesn't humiliate children for laughs. Family doesn't abandon teenagers with $40. Family doesn't only show up when they need signatures. So you'll let us starve? My mother asked. I pulled out a check I'd already prepared. $5,000, enough for a security deposit and first month's rent somewhere modest. It's more than the $40 you gave me, adjusted for inflation. There's also a card for a therapist who specializes in narcissistic personality disorder. Insurance covers it. My mother's face went red. How dare! I dare because I can, because I survived you, because I became someone despite you. I handed my father the check. This is the only money you'll ever see from the trust. Don't contact me again. We'll tell everyone what you've done, Brandon threatened. Everyone already knows, I replied. It was on CNN. I closed the door on them for the last time. 6 months later, the Eleanor Irwin Educational Foundation had awarded its first 50 scholarships, full rides for foster kids aging out of the system, first-generation college students, and young people who'd been told they'd never amount to anything. Each scholarship came with mentorship, support, and something my grandmother had given me, belief in their potential. I still taught kindergarten 3 days a week. The other 2 days, I ran the foundation from my grandmother's old penthouse, the only property I'd kept. I'd converted it into offices and meeting spaces, places where scholarship recipients could study, connect, and build the networks my parents had taken for granted. The Hartford Women's Foundation had restructured completely, with new leadership and transparent accounting. They'd asked me to join the board. I'd declined, but recommended 3 teachers, 2 social workers, and a former foster kid who'd become a successful entrepreneur. Real people who understood real struggle. My parents had relocated to a 2-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport. Father had found work as a bookkeeper, ironic considering. Mother worked at a department store, selling the kind of designer goods she used to buy without thinking. Brandon had moved to Texas, supposedly to start over. He'd sent one email asking for startup capital, which I'd deleted without responding. But the most surprising development came from my mother. 4 months after everything collapsed, she'd started attending therapy. The therapist had reached out, with her permission, to tell me she was making progress, beginning to understand the narcissistic patterns inherited from her own parents. She'd written me a letter. A real apology, not asking for anything, just acknowledging the harm she'd caused. I hadn't responded yet. Maybe I never would. Forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. Today was the first Eleanor Gala, renamed and reimagined. No $500 tickets, no designer gowns, no social climbing. Instead, a celebration of our scholarship recipients with their families, teachers, and mentors. Real philanthropy, the kind that changed lives rather than Instagram feeds. Standing at the podium where my mother had destroyed and then been destroyed, I looked out at faces full of hope instead of judgment. My grandmother Eleanor believed money reveals character, I began. Tonight, we reveal ours. This isn't a story about revenge, though I understand why people see it that way. It's about something more complex, the difference between justice and vengeance, between boundaries and walls, between surviving and thriving. My parents raised me for 16 years, and despite everything, I don't dismiss that. But raising a child is an obligation, not a favor. Feeding and housing your offspring doesn't create a debt that child must spend their lifetime repaying. Love isn't supposed to be transactional. The $40 they gave me that night became my freedom. Their cruelty became my strength. Their absence became my opportunity to discover who I really was without their shadows defining me. Some people ask if I feel guilty about taking the money. I don't. I didn't take anything. I received what my grandmother intended for me. Eleanor knew exactly who her son and daughter-in-law were. She'd watched them for years, spending money they hadn't earned, valuing appearances over substance. The moral clause wasn't just legal protection. It was her way of saying she saw everything, understood everything, and planned for everything. Blood makes you related, but it doesn't make you family. Family shows up when you're struggling, not just when they need signatures. Family celebrates your choices even when they don't understand them. Family doesn't weaponize your existence for cocktail party laughter. I've learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's necessary. That choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. That sometimes the best thing you can do for toxic people is stop enabling their toxicity, even when those people share your DNA. The Eleanor Irwin Educational Foundation has now helped over 200 students. Each one reminds me that our worth isn't determined by our origins, but by our choices. We are not mistakes. We are not accidents. We are exactly who we choose to become. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that they're not alone in dealing with toxic family dynamics. Remember, you don't owe anyone access to your life just because they're family. Setting boundaries is healthy, necessary, and sometimes the greatest act of self-love you can perform. If you have your own story about standing up for yourself, finding your worth, or building a life despite those who said you couldn't, I'd love to read it in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. And if you want to hear more stories about resilience, justice, and the power of believing in yourself, please like and subscribe. Thank you for listening to mine.